Hey, Asia. Hey, Dan. People are already able to chat, so we're good.
All right.
This is so exciting. Okay, awesome. Well, I'm going to get things started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first Skeleton Hour. This is going to be an ongoing monthly horror literature panel series put on by the Horror Writers Association in collaboration with the Last Bookstore in downtown Los Angeles. So our assistant, Megan Eccles, tonight is going to be posting links in the chat to be able to buy our authors who are on the panel's books from the Last Bookstore. So please buy them from there or from local indie booksellers near you. My name is Kathryn McGee. I'm a horror writer, and I also moderate the Thing in the Labyrinth Horror Book Club at the Last Bookstore, and we meet monthly, and now I'm going to be hosting this series as well and bringing in different guest moderators month to month to talk about different topics in horror fiction. So we're very excited to share this first night with you, and it's also the launch night for Mackenzie Kira's novella, All You Need Is Love and a Strong Electric Current. So congratulations to Mackenzie.
Thank you.
I can't hold a copy of your book. It has not arrived yet. But what I'd like to do is just start things off by introducing our panelists to you all. And today we are really, really honored to have with us, first and foremost, Grady Hendrix, author of the Bram Stoker award-winning book, Paperbacks from Hell, a twisted history of 70s and 80s horror fiction, as well as numerous amazing novels, most recently, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, described as Steel Magnolias meets Dracula, set in the 90s.
Oh, thanks.
Yes, thank you, Grady, so much for being with us tonight. Really appreciate it. And I'll also introduce Stephen Graham Jones. We are so incredibly honored to have you here with us today. Stephen wrote a story in this book series we're going to be discussing tonight. The series is called Rewind or Die. I'll talk about that in a minute. And he wrote a story called Too Little Too Late in this really cool novella-length collection called The Midnight Express. And he also wrote the novel The Only Good Indians, which is really amazing and recently came out, and is also the author of Mongrels and the Bram Stoker award-winning novella Mapping the Interior. So Stephen, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. And we also have with us Jessica Guess, which is super exciting. She's the author of the novella Cirque Berserk, which is also in the Rewind or Die series. So welcome, Jessica. And she's also a blogger and the creator of the Black Girl's Guide to Horror. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And onward, we have Lisa Quigley, the author of the novella Hell's Bells, which is also part of the Rewind or Die series. And Lisa is also one half of the Ladies of the Fright podcast, which is an award-winning horror fiction podcast that's really great. And Lisa also had a baby this week, and she's here with us. So congratulations, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I can't believe I'm here either, but I made it.
Yes, well, we really appreciate it. And we're excited to talk more about Hell's Bells. And then our final panelist is Mackenzie Kira. Mackenzie is the second half of the Ladies of the Fright podcast, and she's the author, as I mentioned before, of All You Need Is Love and a Strong Electric Current, a brand new horror novella that came out just yesterday. So tonight is her official book launch party, and this is the horror community helping launch her book into the universe. So we are very excited to be here with you tonight. And yeah, so that's what I have for introduction. So thank you, Mackenzie, for being here.
Thank you. This is a real honor. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to give you guys a little bit of a sense of what we're going to be talking about tonight, you know, the topic is generally 70s to 90s throwback horror, and I sort of see this as being two parts. One, we have Grady on to talk about the history of horror in the 70s to 90s and sort of what that time period means to him and how he's written about it before. And then we're also going to be talking about authors who are writing books written today set during that time period, and those that also sort of seek to emulate the feel of the horror from that period. And this new series of novellas from Unnerving Press called Rewind or Die sort of fits in with that. And so we have all the authors on from that series, or a few of the authors on from that series tonight, of which there are 15 different books, and they all have these really fun, amazing covers. And I'm so sorry I don't have a copy of Mackenzie's because her cover is fantastic and it just hasn't arrived yet. But
I don't know anybody whose book has actually arrived yet. So
Really?
I think we're all just kind of, waiting in anticipation.
Yes, I'm eagerly awaiting mine. So anyway, we'll have links posted in the chat so you can look up the books and see the different covers and hopefully purchase them for yourselves. But to get things started, I just thought it'd be interesting to have as backstory. Grady, you talk a little bit about your interest in writing paperbacks from hell and sort of why you decided to do it and what you learned that was most interesting to you about that time period.
Yeah, well, I mean, I decided to do it because my publisher said they'd buy it. But it's weird. There is sort of this strange arc. I mean, before 1967, horror really wasn't a category of fiction. There were thrillers and suspense stories and all that. But until Rosemary's Baby in 67, there just wasn't. It wasn't its own category that adults read. And after that, there quickly came out in 71, right after Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist and Thomas Tryon's The Other. And then around the same time, Rosemary's Baby, the movie, and The Exorcist movie came out. And that sort of launched this boom. And paperback fiction was a big deal at the time. And everyone just kept copying what came before. So the first big round of it was a lot of possession books and a lot of Satan books. And they had a lot of like pulp fiction influences, a lot of red robes and sacrifices. And then you had the Omen, which was big. Or actually before the Omen, you had Jaws, which was big. And you had this whole boom of like killer animal books. And then you had The Rats was in England in 74. Jaws was in the States. And then you had the Omen novelizations, which sold a ton of books. And that launched this whole killer kid boom. You had the Amityville Horror and Burnt Offerings by Robert Marasco. And suddenly you had this big haunted house boom. And then you hit the 80s and two things kind of happened. One is you had this sort of like blockbuster group of authors like V.C. Andrews and Stephen King and Anne Rice. And then you also had horror started getting younger, both in movies and in books. Like they went from books about people who had kids to, books about kids going to camping, getting killed, and movies about kids going to camping, getting killed. And that sort of, the next big round of it came in the late 80s, early 90s with Silence of the Lambs, when suddenly serial killer books got huge. And that was around the same time that sort of slashers were sort of on their way out. And you had this sort of giant boom in serial killer fiction. And then it all kind of, there was a huge overproduction bubble, way too many books getting printed. Not all of them were very good. The covers were getting more and more lurid. And, it was this kind of race to the bottom with sort of a lot of this sort of slashery stuff. And around 95, 96, I think they shut down the last paperback horror line. I mean, Kensington will still say they kept publishing, but they really didn't. Zebra shut down. It all sort of ended around 95, 96. So it started with Rosemary's Baby, and it kind of ended with a bunch of people getting chopped and mutilated and thrown in dumpsters. But I think one reason it seems so amazing is books were just different then. I mean, in the 70s and 80s, a paperback could sell 1 million copies without really breaking a sweat. I mean, you had hardcover fiction selling 50, 60,000 copies. You had paperbacks selling 100,000, 200,000 copies. And so there was more room to experiment. There was more money. There were more money for illustrators and cover artists and to buy different books and all that. And you had more lines and more publishers. And so you had a lot more weird stuff and a lot more variety of stuff. And I think there's just a lot of nostalgia for it because everyone misses boom times. Yes, isn't that John Russo?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's great because it has that weird silvery cover. He was the supposed screenwriter for Night of the Living Dead, although
yeah.
I always doubt that he made as big a contribution as he says he did.
But he did Return of the Living Dead, right?
Yeah, he wrote the novel Return of the Living Dead, which then Dan O'Bannon and some other people bought the rights for it just because they wanted the title. And then because the movie's totally different from the novel. And then as a make good, they hired John Russo to write the novelization of Return of the Living Dead, and he tried to turn it back into his novel of Return of the Living Dead. It's
Yeah.
There's a whole like KGB thing, I think, in his novel version.
Right.
The Majorettes is a great cover.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, Stephen, I've heard you talk some about how much you read growing up. Like, what are your thoughts on the horror paperbacks from that time?
Oh, they were, yeah, Grady's right. They were each replaceable with the other. They were all kind of the same, but they were a great time. They were a great time. I remember I got so lost in Scorpions. I read Scorpions multiple times. It's just so fun because it's Scorpions killing teenagers having sex in vans, and that's all you really need in a story, you know, I think.
And those scorpions hate boobs. I remember they attack a lot of breasts.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and what about everyone else? What were your experiences reading like your first horror paperbacks? When did they kind of get to you?
I think for me, a lot of what I read when I was younger was like R.L. Stine and Fear Street. And so like I read, I think almost all of the Fear Street books, or at least all the ones that were in my libraries around. And like, talk about covers, like those covers always used to draw me in because it was always like a girl being like on the cover or something, like wide-eyed and like about like going like this, or like I don't know. And I don't know, they always drew me in. And then I read Lois Duncan as well.
Yeah, she's great.
So yeah, like so those were kind of like what I was reading from middle school to high school, and that kind of like reading horror, that's exactly what I think of when I think of, you know, what kind of influenced me.
Yeah, well, you know, and that's the stuff that survived at the end, is when it sort of went YA with the R.L. Stine, Fear Street. Mm-hmm. Did you read Christopher Pike, or was he not your thing?
Oh, yeah. I read, there was a collection called 13. I was like 13 Tales of Horror by 13 Masters of Horror. And Christopher Pike's story was the first one in there. And it was called like The Colette Caller or something like that. It was my favorite. There was like a really creepy song in there and everything. I loved him. Like it was yeah.
Pike's wild.
Mm-hmm.
What about Mackenzie, Lisa? Did you two have any that particularly stood out to you?
Mackenzie?
Sure. You know, honestly, not when I was growing up. I actually read a lot more. I reread a lot of series growing up, and then I was also one of the kids that kind of went right into Stephen King. And so I think I kind of remember reading maybe my first Stephen King. I would have been whenever I found it on my parents' shelf. So that would have been 10 or 11. And so I didn't really have a time when I was reading something else. I kind of just went straight there.
Good. Awesome. Lisa?
That's a harsh baptism.
Yeah, well, I'm actually like this weird outlier that didn't grow up reading this stuff, so I don't have a good answer for this. I found it all a lot later in life.
No,
that was my case too. I found the covers way too gross as a kid. Yeah. Like, I actually didn't start reading Christopher Pike until like a year ago, when I read like 30 of them at once. And I mean, I will say, even as an adult, Christopher Pike will blow your mind. His books are bonkers.
Yeah, I kind of found my way into the weird through the Neil Gaiman side, and then like slipped in that way, and then it all opened up to me from there.
Were you a Sandman fan, or
later? I found his novels first, which is kind of backwards. Yeah. I think, because I think everyone finds him. I know. The first one was like Neverwhere is the first thing I read, and
what a weird one to start with. That's crazy.
I know, and I became like obsessed with him from that, and this was like really before you could Google anything, so I didn't even know about his comics for the longest time. I just thought I knew him as a novelist. And then, so yeah, right? It's really backwards. But then, because I loved his novel so much, I found the comics, and then I found, you know, my way into that world. And when people would ask like, oh, what do you like to write? And I would be like, well, I'd try to describe like the Neil Gaiman stuff, because it's not fantasy, it's not science fiction, and I didn't really know that could be in like a horror vein too. Like, I didn't know that what I liked was horror, because I didn't think of it that way. And not that he's like 100% that either, but yeah, it was like this weird thing. I would always think like, oh, I don't think I like horror, because I didn't know that that's what I liked. I just thought I was just reading books that were good to me. I didn't realize that that's what it was, or that it could be classified as weird or horror or whatever.
You know, I guess any way you find Neil Gaiman is a good way, unless you're like looking over a windowsill or something.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, hopefully it's not.
Probably the most interesting way.
Yeah.
And what about those scary stories to tell in the dark books?
Oh yeah.
I've never read those. I've got the book. I bought it last year, but I've never read a single one of those stories. I saw the movie. I liked the movie. But
well, for me, it was always the illustrations were the best. Those Alvin Schwartz. Was it Alvin Schwartz who? No, Stephen Gamble. Stephen Gamble, I think, was the illustrator.
Not sure, but I bet someone will pop up in the chat and tell us. Well, thanks for giving us that backstory and all of your sort of reading history. And I want to kind of transition into talking about what you all are writing now, because you've all written stuff recently set in earlier decades. And I just wanted to kind of get a sense of what's appealing to you about that, and, you know, what your story was kind of specifically, and how, like when you were asked to write something, what made you want to, like, especially for Rewind or Die, you knew it was kind of fitting into this series of stories that were taking place then. So what made you think of your particular story? I can start with you, Mackenzie, if you want to tell us a little bit about your novella and how you got into that.
Hey, thank you so much. And I'm so sorry. In true fashion, I've got my dog Bear snoring behind me. And so I am terribly sorry if the noise is at all distracting. He's at my feet and he had a big day. So forgive me. Yeah, so the novella's out, and gosh, my son would have been about maybe 6 or 7 months old. And I'd been having a really difficult time writing any kind of horror, really reading horror, anything like that. Just from baby hormones, everything was too scary with a newborn. And so the call for Rewind or Die came out, and and Lisa, in true Lisa fashion, said, "Hey, I know you have a lot of stuff on your plate right now, but you should really do this one other thing." She's like, "You should answer this call. It's really cool." And so, I read the call that Eddie put out. And it was very much like, hey, I want stuff that has humor, but I want stuff that's between, the 70s and the 90s. And, give me blood, give me gore, give me humor. And so I had this like short story that I had tried to shop around, and I had originally written it for a magazine called Nasty that was out just after Trump got elected, and it was in response to Trump getting elected. It was all for women, nasty women. And so I wrote this short story with Sadie in mind, because she was going to be one of the nastiest of all women. She was going to be powerful, she was going to be driven. But it was very graphic, and I had a very difficult time selling the short story. I had a lot of people say they wanted to take it, and then they turn back around the next day and say, actually, my editor-in-chief said, no, I'm sorry, but I love it. It's like, cool, thank you. And so I loved the interest, but I drawered it. And so when this call came out, I said, well, actually, I think maybe I have the right thing for it. And because it was so short before, it didn't really have the whole 70s to 90s feel. But thankfully, when I thought at the very beginning that I was maybe writing a slasher, Stephen was kind enough to give me a whole list of homework of things to watch for slashers. And so I think that that's kind of what maybe gave it a little bit of a playful edge, is because I was like super overloaded on slashers. And this ended up not being a true slasher at all. But I think that helped.
You can't be overloaded on slashers. There's no there's no threshold,
I was so bummed when it wasn't a true slasher. I tried so hard. She's got a mask, like she has a weapon. I tried so hard too, and it wouldn't work for me.
Well, and one of the things I thought was really interesting, Grady, in your introduction to Paperbacks from Hell, you have some statement about how all the fiction from this time period is a lot of different things, but it's always interesting. And I love
never boring.
Never boring. Never boring. And I kind of love that as a defining characteristic. And I think that certainly applies, Mackenzie, to your story for sure. It's constant thrills. And, I don't know if you mind me giving a little more backstory about what it's about, but her protagonist has a unique fetish where she likes it cold. and it devolves into a Frankenstein story that's sexy and fun and all things interesting on every single word, every single page.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Then I want to move on. I guess maybe Lisa, next, if you could talk to us a little bit about what your novella is about and some of your themes and how that fits in with Rewind or Die.
Oh boy. So this is I have to remember how I describe it, but it is a kind of like a coming of age tale with a lot of Freddie Mercury, a lot of 90s inspired music, some Satanic Panic, a little bit of Sympathy for the Devil. I really just wanted to write something that would be fun, and it was just a blast to write. So and you were saying like the inspiration, was that the question?
Yeah, like if you're asked to write something that's sort of set during that period, was there a reason some of these topics came up for you first, maybe?
I think for me, I think automatically I went back to that time because I was a teen, maybe just like 5 years later than when I set the story. I set it back so that I could have the queen element. But I don't know. I think for me, there was just so much going on at that time in my life. It is like a fraught time. I was like, 12, 13, 14, around that age. And I was living this very sheltered life. I personally wasn't allowed to listen to a lot of the music that they listened to in my book. So some of it was wish fulfillment, was like, I would have wanted to be this teen that was like obsessed with all this music, because I was obsessed with music, but I had to like listen to basically like Christian knockoff versions of the music that I wanted to be listened to. So it was just this like me kind of like wanting to go back to this time in my life where if I got caught listening to music I wasn't supposed to, it was like this horrible thing. And my life was like very influenced by a lot of like fear of Satan and fear of the devil. And so I feel like my life, there wasn't like actual Satanic Panic in my life. Like I wasn't involved in any of that like movement or anything, but I feel like that fear of Satan and fear of like everything being like for the devil, and the music you listen to was like somehow going to invoke Satan. That was like very real. And I had friends who would throw like CD smashing parties to like get rid of all their satanic music, which is stuff like Backstreet Boys or whatever, like, so I just wanted to go, I don't know, when Eddie put out this call, I just had like all these pieces. I had been kind of working on different parts of the story for a while, and all these different things came together, and the time period was a big part of it, because I wanted to look at that. And then because I had over here also developed this obsession with Queen and wanted to bring that in, and so it all just needed to be set at that time.
Yeah, and I was hoping to talk tonight some about your Freddie Mercury obsession and sort of how that became central to your plot. But I think like it's also interesting because it places it so squarely in a certain period, and
it like had to be that time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thanks for that. And Jessica, I wanted to ask you a little bit too about how you came up with the idea for Cirque Berserk and sort of what your novella is about a little bit.
Right. So I kind of owe this to Steven as well, because I was following him on Twitter and he suggested the movie Strangers Pray at Night. And I watched that movie, and at the third act of it, there's a lot of music. There's a lot of music throughout that entire movie, but like something really awesome happens in a pool set to like Total Eclipse of the Heart. And I remember thinking, like, even though it wasn't 80s, it looked 80s with like the lights and the music playing and everything like that. And that night I went to bed and I just like got this image of someone doing something really horrible on roller skates set to Rhythm of the Night. And I was like, oh, I should write that. But like I had just gotten out of grad school, and I like, things are in my head about like form and all this, stuff. And then I saw the call for stories, and I was like, I want to try this. I want to try to actually write this thing. And while I was writing it, while I was planning it, I was going back and thinking about all the R.L. Stine and all the, you know, Lois Duncan and all the slashers I've ever watched. And I was like there was like a resentment, because I was like, I love them so much, and yet I don't see myself in them, you know? So like, I kind of wanted to write something that both showed my love for it, but then also like kind of turned it around so that someone like another, my biggest thing was just, I want some girl, some Black girl to see this, or to see the cover, to read the book. Yep, that's it. To see the cover, to read the book, and just be like, yeah, this is it. Horror is for me too. So that's why I wrote it, and that's why I wrote it the way I did. And music also had a huge influence on mine too, because like, it was how I created an atmosphere, you know, for the 80s. And oh, what's it about? So yes, it is a slasher, and it's set in a haunted carnival. And basically some teenagers do what teenagers do in these situations. They go to a place they're not supposed to, and they find out that some urban legends are very much true. So, yeah.
Yes. And that is one entertaining book. I love as an aside, just the way it's structured, where you know, have a bunch of different perspectives, and there's sort of this like passing the baton between different narrators type of approach that keeps it so high energy.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I jump in for a sec? Just what you were saying, Jessica. You know, that's something I always wonder, because, you know, there are so few African-American authors or just non-white authors who were writing during the 70s and 80s in horror. And it's really, really a drag. And the few who wrote, I mean, Joe Nazell is one. There's maybe one other. Their books have disappeared. They don't get reprinted. And beyond that, there's so few Black or non-white characters. In movies, it's a little better. Like George Romero was great with that, with Ken Faree and Dawn of the Dead, and Dwayne Jones in Night of the Living Dead, and Ganja and Hess later. But like, it's such a drag, because there's this huge chunk of horror that's just white. And I feel like there must have been Black authors writing horror stories for the magazines or something that maybe have disappeared. They never got reprinted. They never got anthologized. I don't know. It drives me nuts though, because it is this really weird place. Like, I don't know. You have men's adventure fiction had Black authors and Black characters. You have even some romance in Westerns, but just not in horror. It really, it's a giant, I don't know, not flaw. I mean, it is what it is, but I feel like it's hard for people, like you were just saying, who are not white, who are fans of horror, to have this giant period where you're not seeing anyone who looks like you or has your experience.
Yeah.
What's that Deep Space Nine episode where Sisko goes back to like the 40s and he's a Black science fiction writer, but he can't get his stuff published? Do y'all know Deep Space Nine? Somebody?
No, I'm not a Deep Space.
Yeah.
I remember Deep Space Nine. I don't remember that episode, but that's why.
But I always feel like it also is weird, and I'm actually curious if, like, I don't know, anyone who's not a dude has a point of view on this, but I find it so weird reading 70s and 80s horror fiction, because there's some great female characters and there's lots of female authors, but so many of the characters are sort of arm candy. They're there to be rescued and everything. And I just wonder, as a kid reading that stuff, are you identifying with the dude who gets to be the hero and do the fun stuff? Or you, like, what's that like to read just as a woman? I'm curious.
So I can't really say anything about reading them because I went straight to King, but as far as like watching the older movies, it made me have a really skewed interpretation of what a final girl was, because it was, they didn't start out as very powerful characters. They had to kind of become those powerful characters, but it still took men to get them there. And so I really kind of started out not liking the idea of the final girl, because I don't know, it wasn't just like true feminist power yet. I think that it's much different now.
Yeah, I have to say that especially watching, because like I want to say almost a lot of the Fear Street ones, going back to that one, they had girl protagonists. So like I can't really speak about that. Yeah. But for watching some of these, like once again, because there were very little people of color, very, very few Black people, I kind of watched it removed from the whole situation. I wasn't necessarily rooting for anyone. Like, oh, y'all can go, really, I don't care. But you know, that's just what it was. But the first time I actually found myself, and this probably is why I write how I write and why Cirque Berserk is the way it is. The first time I saw myself rooting for someone was with Urban Legend. And it was, I mean, it's an old one, so you guys should have seen it by now. And but it was at the end when Brenda tells her story about why she's doing what she's doing. And I felt, it was the first time I actually felt for, I was like, oh, this really hurt you. Like and when she explains what happened and how senseless it was. So that was the first time, and like seeing, once again, spoilers, but this is an old movie, but seeing a female slasher, you know, when you take off the mask and it's a girl, white girl, but girl with huge curly hair. And I was just like, even that little thing that she just had huge curly hair, I like stuck to that. I like grabbed onto that. And I was like, okay, I see, I can identify with you even a little bit. So that was the first time for me. But yeah, like all the other times I was just watching like, yeah, get them. They shouldn't have been in there anyway. Like, so yeah.
That's what I always thought was such a bummer about that Carrie remake. I was like, I was sure before that came out they were going to make Carrie Black, because I was like, this is Carrie. You know, she's out of place. She doesn't, no one agrees with her. She just feels like an outsider. And then Chloe Moretz, whatever her name is. It's like, not a believable Carrie. Even Sissy Spacek looks like some kind of freaky albino ginger.
I'm so glad I found this in time for this. But
yeah. Thanks for that. Stephen, I wanted to ask you a bit about your story in the Midnight exhibit. And if you could talk to us kind of about, it fits in with, there's 3 stories in a row that sort of fit into a framing narrative, kind of how you came to write this story.
Yeah, I think that story's set in, I want to say it's about 88, which is Grady's year for my best friend's exorcism, which I would set all my stuff in. I would set all my stuff in 88 if I could get away with it, you know, but I would end up packing every day of the year with novels or something. But well, like Mongrels, it's set in the 80s too, you know. I'm just doing stuff so Megan will have to put it on the chat, you know. Maybe Megan, can you put this one in the chat? You know this one? Somebody out there will do it. Anyways, this story, what happened was I had 4 stories due that week, and I knew that 2 of them were supposed to be 80s stories for different 80s anthologies, one of them being this one. And so I wrote my stories and then mailed them out to people. And Eddie got back to me and he said, hey man, I like this story, but it was supposed to be 80s. And I was like, oh man, I had mailed them to like wrong people, you know? And so then I don't remember what happened. I don't know if I fixed this, something happened. And anyways, I ended up with one of these things. Do you remember these switch pickers? I call them switch pickers. My daughter made this for me. I put all y'all's initials in here. You probably can't see it. Yeah. But it doesn't go any deeper because I can't unfold it without breaking it. Anyways, why did I write in the 80s? Just because Eddie told me to, I guess. That's the big reason. And the first story I wrote for this, it was actually set in the 80s properly like it's supposed to be, but then it turned out not to be horror. And it felt so fake to make a non-horror story horror. And so it's easier just to write a different story, you know? But I'm not really answering your question, Kathryn. I'm sorry. What'd you ask again?
That's just sort of how you came up with the idea. I mean, for me, the switch picker is so interesting.
Yeah. You know, I kind of doubt if switch picker is the actual name, but I cannot figure out the right name, and I hate to do research, so I just thought I'll make up switch picker. You know, I don't know.
I had a conversation with Megan about this today, and we called them cootie catchers as kids, and then
called them what?
Cootie catchers.
Oh.
I don't know. And then I also found a website that calls them chatterboxes.
Wow. Hey, look, my daughter made me a little bitty one. My fingers hardly fit into it. But,
Wow.
yeah, there's in this story, there's a point in the story where there's a whole lot of these little ones and they crawl everywhere like spiders. That was really fun. But I don't know. I just said it in the 80s because Eddie said it in the 80s, and I thought no cell phones and got to be like a Buick sedan in there, you know. So that's the 80s for me.
Awesome. Thank you. So Grady, what I thought was one of the things that's interesting about how you organize Paperbacks from Hell is you recognize these sort of cultural touchstones that seem to come up a lot for people. Like, for example, I was just rereading your chapter on haunted house fiction and how like the theme of real estate kind of happens and then immediately reflects the time. And I was wondering if you could just sort of talk about how you found common threads in all of your reading.
Yeah, I mean, it was really luck. I mean, I just read a ton of them and just wrote down the dates and tried to make a timeline. You sort of see things start to fall in. And really what it is it's kind of a bummer because it's like something will be a big hit and then everyone will rip it off. And so what's really interesting to me though is that Stephen King, if you look at his timeline, he's knocking off these trends, but like years after the trend's over. So it's like haunted houses were really big. I think Amityville Horror 78, 76, I can't remember. But then The Shining, which is it, Stephen?
I think it was 78, if I remember correctly.
78, yeah. And then The Shining's like 80. You know, or like 79, like it's Cujo's a killer animal movie, but it's book, but it's the early 80s, whereas most killer animal stuff was the 70s. You know, his like Carrie is a few years too late for Killer Kids. Like he's just off. It's like he sees all this stuff, he reads the trend, and then he sort of deconstructs it and does his own thing. But yeah, I mean, it's just the 80s is weird though. The 80s, the trends are hard to find. I mean, vampires were kind of always big, like you know, like they're sort of separate, they're their own genre almost, so it's like not like a big vampire craze comes off of Anne Rice. VC Andrews, it's not like there were a lot of people writing incest attic fiction after her. I mean, it was there, but it wasn't her thing exclusively. Really the big thing in the 80s was stuff getting younger and moving towards R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike. And you also had these weird novelizations in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s of like Halloween. There were like some YA Halloween books that just looked terrifying. I think there was a Friday the 13th novelizations that were...
I read all those before I saw the movies,
Yeah, and so it just got younger. And then it all went super gory. But yeah, and there was actually not even a big, I always thought there was going to be a big trend in UFO books after Communion, the Whitley Strieber, but there really weren't.
I know.
It was weird.
Communion and Majestic were absolutely terrifying. Those books together, golly. Man. Yeah.
Well, and there's also this weird thing where people were saying that like, that I always thought was interesting is that you look at Communion as sort of like a reverse colonialization nightmare. It's like you're just a nice middle-class white person and you're asleep in your bed and suddenly someone rips you out of your bed and they like, you know, rape you with an anal probe and impregnate you with an alien baby and you can't stop them or resist them and you're just like totally colonized by aliens. And you know, it was sort of when we were dealing with a lot of like, you know, American excursions into Latin America and South America and all this stuff. And so maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, could be. You know, I was reading a novel, a slasher set in the 80s recently. I didn't read it all because on about page 20 or 40, there was a whole page where they describe what everybody at this camp is wearing. And they describe the high socks, the short shorts, the headbands, the half shirts, all the stuff that you like American Horror Story would associate with the 80s, you know? And I had to stop reading it then because I realized this book is not inside the 80s. This book is making fun of a version of the 80s that's been mediated to it, you know? And that it didn't feel authentic at all. And so I love the slasher stuff, but I couldn't get past the fact that it was fake either, you know?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, how do authors today go beyond those more superficial cultural touchstones to make something really feel emotionally like it's from that period?
Yeah.
And I wonder if that. Oh yeah. I wonder if some of it comes down to characters or what you all think about that.
It's probably just engaging the anxieties that were rampant during that time. Like, is the bomb going to fall? Are you going to get AIDS? Are you going to get taken away from the mall and cannibalized in the parking lot? Are you going to get castrated at the movie theater? All the stuff that we were afraid of in the 80s, you know?
Castrated the movie theater?
Yeah, I was going to say that one too.
That was a big story where I grew up, man. You were always afraid to go to the bathroom at the movie theater because there was a kid who got castrated in the bathroom.
The two that I remember are there was one that they said that people were putting like poison
in like Tylenol.
No, that one too. But there were poison like pins inside of phone payphones, like the slots or the coin slots, that if you put your finger in there was going to be like a pin that would like poke you and it had poison in it. The other one I remember is that people were leaving bombs in beer bottles. So like
bombs.
Yeah, that I don't even think that it was like a real thing, or maybe it happened like one time somewhere. But I remember as a kid, I would see a beer bottle, and it's still sometimes like it's in the back of my head. I don't know why. It was like on the news or something, and it was like, you know, you'll be at a parking lot, and there'll be beer bottles like left in the parking lot, and there was this urban legend that there was bombs in those, and so if you touched it, it would like explode or something.
Wow, I never heard that.
Yeah, we got
that's really fascinating. Actually, when was that, Lisa? 80s, 90s, early 90s?
It's got to be in the 90s, so I feel like I was like 8 or 9, so it'd be like early 90s. That I remember that, and I was in the Midwest, so Michigan area at that time, or something like that.
Wow.
You know, one of ours was like,
go
ahead.
No, you go, Greg.
No, I was just saying one of ours was that if you went to the mall and you didn't want to walk too close to other people because they'd have pins, just like needles, sewing needles with AIDS on them, and they'd scratch you with them, and then you get AIDS, and die, probably 5 minutes later.
Wow. This is probably regional from being in Texas. We always had the story that a family and their 5-year-old kid goes down to Juarez, or just across the border to the market for the day. In the market, they lose their kid, and they go to the border crossing, and they're like, help us, we can't find our kid. And the border guard is like, what's he look like? You know, he's wearing yellow shorts, a red shirt. And he says, is that him right there? And there's a guy walking up carrying the kid. And they're like, yes, that's our kid. And they start running to that guy carrying the kid. And that guy carrying the kid drops the kid and takes off. And they pick the kid up, and the kid has been killed and hollowed out and stuffed with drugs to smuggle across the border. And the cautionary part of that is stay with your parents when you go to Mexico, you know? Sure. And it was, so we all
don't get hollowed out.
Exactly. Yeah. That'd be kind of a bummer. Yeah.
I remember there was a story, my mom told me this, but it was basically just her telling me about how I was born. But she basically made my aunt stay with me because they gave her, she had a C-section, so she was passed out. And before she like had everything, she told her sister, stay with her, they're stealing babies, because like apparently like someone dressed up as a nurse and tried to like kidnap a baby somewhere in Florida, like around the time. So like she was like, watch them like as she's about to pass out while I don't know. Wow. But that
was this in the hospital?
Yeah, in the hospital.
Yeah. Well, because there were actual incidents of people stealing babies or switching babies in hospitals. So it's amazing this stuff has like a tiny kernel of truth, and then it's like, as your mom passes out, watch her.
And it's funny because it's just an update on the changeling story that we're still telling ourselves, you know?
Yeah. Well, when you're talking about hollowing out kids to smuggle drugs, I mean, that was a famous story in China in the 40s and 50s. Really? Is that, the people running from the Japanese over the border would look for kids who'd been lost, like they'd missed their parents in the big refugee flows running from Japanese army. And they would be friendly to the kid and feed him a meal, be like, we'll help you find your mom and dad. And then they drug the kid and hollow him out and stuff him with their family money or, whatever heirlooms they wanted to get over the border. So that story's been around for a long time.
Wow, that's interesting. We should write a big novel about hollowed out kids coming back to get justice, you know?
Your baby is my drug wallet.
Man, this is a pretty solid chat thread with people chiming in with things they were told to be afraid of as children.
Well, yeah, I saw someone drop in earlier the AIDS needles in movie theater seats.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and also Halloween candy, razor blades, and like I remember, the hospital, where I grew up, even up through the 80s, would X-ray your Halloween candy. Like to me, like. Isn't the threat of residual radiation worse than the hospital? Like, couldn't you tell if your apple had a razor blade in it? Like, who's eating an apple for Halloween?
Yeah, who
like that stuff goes in the garbage.
Yeah.
For a while, my mom was telling me when I was little that she was checking my candy, you know, for razor blades and to make sure that they were, and to make sure that, you know, they still had the wrapper on them. But now that I'm an adult, I know that she was just making an excuse to eat all my Halloween candy.
I think Daniel Krauss just released a book about a novella, I think. Blood Sugar?
Blood Sugar.
Blood Sugar? Yeah.
Yeah, with hard case crime. Yeah.
You know, this is probably like super regional, as in local to my house, but my mom used to always warn I had a lot of brothers. She'd tell us not to eat the dishwasher detergent, because if we did, then she'd have to push a button on our heads to make us go to sleep. And I don't know what the basis of that was supposed to be, but we never ate the dishwasher detergent, you know, because we didn't want to be that push button and go to sleep.
Were you tempted to eat the dishwasher detergent ever?
Maybe one of us had. I don't remember. But yeah.
Also, what, y'all had buttons on your heads?
Well, we'd have to get it installed. If we ate dishwasher detergent, we'd have to get a button installed, and she'd have to push it to make us go to sleep. I don't know where that came from, but it really haunted me for my whole childhood. I was terrified of that.
Yeah, people are chiming in that was the Tide Pods of the 80s. This is really funny.
Amazing.
We've only got about 10 minutes or so left, so I just want to ask the audience if anyone wants to chime in with questions for any of our authors, please do that now. And I don't know, Megan, have you received any questions to this point? If you could feed some of those to us.
Yes, so I actually have a question from Diana Love. Do boy readers not identify with girl main characters, going back to the question we had about gender in stories?
Oh, I identify more with the girls.
Yeah, I identify with the final girls anyways, you know, like I'm trying to think like in the Shining, in the Wendy point of view sections. I don't know if I identify with her or not, but I definitely identify with anything that's remotely Jamie Lee Curtis, you know.
Yeah,
but also go ahead.
Pardon me. I don't know why it would be the case that the boys wouldn't be able to identify with the women unless they just plain old hadn't been told to or taught to. Because if women wanted to be strong for so long, we had to identify with the men.
But isn't that famous study? And I've never seen it. I always wonder if this is as fictional as Razor Blades and Apples, where everyone always cites this study that, oh yes, in the 70s in publishing, they did a marketing study and found that girls would identify with male main characters, but boys wouldn't identify with female main characters. So they pushed for more male main characters, which I've never seen this study. Who did this? I'm not aware that publishing does any marketing studies. I don't know a publisher who has their shit together to do marketing studies. So what is this?
Yeah. They're like, it's this study we did. Like
Don did that study. It was very conclusive.
He asked his son.
Megan,
although just to what Stephen I was just gonna say to what Stephen was saying, I totally identify with Wendy in The Shining because she's the only reasonable person. You've got Danny, who's a little freak show kid, and then you've got Jack, who's like awful. Like Wendy is the one reasonable character in that book.
Yeah, she is.
Okay, I've got another question from Dino. Is there any aspect from the novels of the 70s and 80s that you wish you would see more of in the modern novels?
Practical effects. I don't know. I don't want to jump. Somebody else got it? Let me think.
I would say Killer Animals.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I miss Killer Animals.
Yeah. I miss that old trick that novels used to do, the mass market paperbacks, where some editor or marketing person would take the most exciting page and move it up to the very front of the book. So you'd read that exciting page. And I don't know what that's called, but I kind of miss that tactic.
I don't have a good answer for this. I was just thinking, I don't know, that there seemed to be this almost like playfulness about books from that time that I think it's starting to come back a little bit now. And I think, honestly, I mean, all the books I've read in this series has kind of done that a little bit, but also they've done something new along with it. So there's just this like playfulness, not taking itself too seriously, a little bit tongue in cheek. I feel like I would love to see more of that.
I mean, I love the covers. I mean, like I was just saying, those covers always used to draw me in. And I don't know why, but when you first asked that, I just thought about Christine, Stephen King's Christine, and how I don't know that I've read anything like that besides that. But like, if
A Killer Car,
I don't know if I've read any other ones like that. Maybe they're out there, but
Maximum Overdrive, man. I get you see that.
Yeah, very few. I'm actually trying. I'm not. There's like a rando thing here and there. Like there's a killer train or something. But yeah, you're right. I hadn't really thought of that. But killer inanimate objects is not a huge thing in books, as far as I'm aware of.
In spite of the monkey's paw being at the core of most horror, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got someone saying, what about more killer furniture?
I think Graham Masterton did a
Deathbed
book about
Beats.
Yeah. Graham Masterton did a book about a killer chair. And I just remember the end. It's like they have to put it on this like pad where they're going to bomb it. And it's like they're staring at this chair that's on this concrete pad as it's about to explode. And like it starts to move. It's not very convincing.
Stephen King would always have like the haunted word processor or the haunted like laundry machine, all that kind of stuff, you know.
So we have multiple questions asking how you think our current times will affect horror as we move forward.
Oh God.
I'm really hoping that a lot of the humor comes back, because right now I think that everybody is really, really terrified in every which way, anybody. And I'm waiting for everybody to kind of be able to take a deep breath, and instead of scream, I think we need to laugh. And so I think that that's coming. I hope it is. And so I feel like that's kind of how this particular climate has affected the horror people, has affected everything that's being written and shown and things like that. It's like, no, we're scared. And I think that we're ready to not be like pent up. We're not ready to be this scared anymore. We're ready to, we need that release, I think.
I also think that there is like right now is just rife with so many, you could isolate any one thing that's going on right now and pull out a horror story. Cause like from like the environment to like politically to, you know, social, like the pandemic, everything, like I feel like there's going to be a lot of good things coming out, possibly a lot of like fluff, but that's always the case. But I think that there's a lot of inspiration, but we have to get through it first, because I feel like people are just, we're
processing.
we're still in it. There's no reflective, you know, distance or anything like that. We're still right smack dab in the middle of it. So it's like, you're still psychologically taking in all this stuff. Yeah.
It's like when someone makes a joke and you go, ooh, too soon. That's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah.
You know, I hope that we're at the very front edge of a kind of a little another slasher boom, because I think slashers are really going to be attractive to the whole world, because we look at like partisan conventions happening on the White House lawn, and that's not really fair. That's not legal, but nobody's punished for it. But when you go to slasher world, every unfairness is punished. The scales of justice are balanced, and I think we need for some part of the world to be fair. And if the real world isn't going to be fair, then we can go to slashers and find fairness for 240 pages or 2 hours at the cinema or whatever.
It's funny, you know, I feel like Mackenzie has a good point that like, I think people do want fun stuff. I also feel like Jessica and Steven saying that like, you know, horror sort of uniquely suited, like, you know, and you look at any element of this and it fits into something. To me, the thing I'm having a really hard time wrapping my head around is just all the dead people. I mean, 1,000 people died today. I just missed the 4th funeral of someone. And, you know, horror is that one genre that sits with death in a way that no other genre does. And we're going to get through this. And I think, like Jessica was just saying, get to the point where we can like not be in the middle of it and sort of look back at it. What do we do with that? Like everyone's going to come out of this with a lot of ghosts following them around. A lot of funerals you missed, a lot of closure you didn't get, a lot of people where you wanted to be there in the room. And I don't know how we're all going to deal with that. And especially in horror, where this is the genre that deals with that. I can't wrap my head around it.
You know, Max Brooks' novel World War Z has that chapter that, I don't know if it's a lost chapter, a chapter that came later. It was published, I forget where it was published, but he has a chapter about the whole generation that needs exactly that kind of closure you're talking about, Grady. And he comes up with a really novel way to achieve that closure.
So what do they do?
Well, what happens is they find a zombie and they dress it up to look like your dead brother, and then you go into a room and shoot it, as I recall. Yeah. And that lets you know that dude's dead, you know?
Fair enough. That's one way.
Megan, do we want to do one more if we have it? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. What do you think is the most underrated horror of the 80s and 90s and 70s? Throwback.
Most underrated.
Fire in the Sky. I'd say Fire in the Sky. Fire in the Sky is terrifying. From what, 94, 93, somewhere around there?
Fire in the Sky is amazing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I feel like this is Final Jeopardy.
No? I know.
We're stumped.
Not everyone has to answer.
All right, but you guys are the hot seat.
We can.
No, but I feel like a lot of that UFO, like Communion, the movie's fantastic. Like, I mean, isn't that Christopher Walken?
Yeah.
In Communion? Yeah.
Oh, are we talking movies or books?
I think either.
Oh, okay. Well, it always surprised me how many people haven't seen Urban Legend, because like I don't know why, like it feels like people have seen Scream because Scream is amazing, but like, and they've seen I Know What You Did Last Summer, but then they haven't seen Urban Legend. I'm like, oh, like, so I don't know. I would say that one. That's my favorite. Yeah.
The Urban Legend's really good. You know, Bill Burgess, I just saw him pop up saying Nightbreed, you know, Clive Barker's Nightbreed.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, what's that one? Sleepwalkers. Stephen King wrote the screenplay for it. I know people don't. I don't know. I love it. I love that one. Cats Save the Day.
It's a lot of fun, yeah.
When do you see that?
Cats Save the Day.
Yeah, random street cats come and save the day.
And that's amazing. I think that's what we're all going to need pretty soon.
Some cats.
Just some cats.
You know, what I would love to see from the '80s remade is Wolfen, because I think Wolfen is a great story. I think it was hindered by like non-CGI wolves, I guess. You know, I think if they could have done the wolves the Wolfen as Whitley Strieber describes him, that movie would have been killer.
Awesome. Well, we're about at time. This flew by, but does anyone have any final thoughts they want to share? Or
I selfishly wanted to give a shout out to my dad who came to this. So thanks very much, Dad.
Thanks, Mackenzie's dad. And Mackenzie, we're all very proud of you for your book launch tonight. And it's just such an honor to have such an awesome group of writers all together to talk about this cool stuff. So thank you to all the panelists and everyone for being here. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for moderating it, Kathryn.
Louis Tour fan.
Yeah, thank you. Also, Jessica, someone wants to know, is that a Billy Butcher shirt?
No, it's Carrie.
It's like Carrie.
No, got it. Someone
that's
was asking.
amazing.
Cavity colors. Yeah.
Love it. Love it. So we'll be announcing our next Skeleton Hour topics on social media soon, and look forward to doing this again next month. So yeah, thanks again to everyone for being on the panel and for watching.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.